Hey everyone, welcome to a very Gary Stu review, Shakespeare Undead, Chapter 2, Part 2, because I did start this in text on the blog. You'll find a link below, and I just didn't want to continue typing it, I guess. Anyways, so, I'm pretty sure Will's a vampire. By Will, I mean Shakespeare. I'm 98% sure that Will is a vampire. And he fights zombies. And right now, a rather large gentleman named Edmund has just stormed in with a head injury from which he's bleeding. And he ran into a zombie, basically, and he's describing the zombie attack, and the zombie was apparently trying to chant brains as he was trying to eat Edmund's, and his teeth were snapping together as if he'd eat his way right through my skull. Then he started making yummy sounds. Yummy sounds, Will repeated. Edmund said, rubbing his stomach for emphasis. Which I was particularly amused by that, just because yummy sounds. But Q, and then Edmund's drunk right now, so drunk and suffering from a head injury, so the and then the rubbing for emphasis, totally something a drunk person would do. Probably something a drunk person with a head injury would do too, but I have been lucky enough not to have to deal with that so far, so let's knock on wood that I never have to. And the stagehands are still making fun of him, kind of, implying that he has no brains for someone to eat. Not that they're really talking, they are talking about eating. Will keeps talking about blood, and they're, the stagehands are basically rationalizing the zombie sighting away, and Will is thinking about how Edmund will totally buy into it because he is drunk. And, quote, human beings were very good at rationalizing. Will wished he still had the ability. Unfortunately, he was one of the things humans rationalized about, end quote. He's totally a vampire, you guys. Such a vampire! Such a vampire. Quote, simply put, what Edmund had seen on the streets of London was a zombie. Will should know, in times past, he was the one who raised them. End quote. They're throwing so much melodrama at us. It's just like, first he's a zombie hunter, and then he kills a guy by accident, and then he's in a play, and one of his friends stumbles upon him with this serious head injury, and Will's supernatural human strength, or non-human, supernatural strength is almost revealed to a bunch of people, and then the guy's talking about zombies and being attacked, and now Will raises zombies, or he did. It's just like, this is 12 pages in, you guys. We are 12 pages in, and this is all that has happened. God, this is intense. I love it. So Will is tracking the zombie now through the smell of blood. He's totally a vampire. Totally. And he's talking about zombies and the way they walk. Wait, he's talking about a man, because I skipped to the next page, and the top of it says he walked the way zombies walk, and I'm like, is Will imitating the zombie? Is he becoming one with the zombie in order to find the zombie? But no, we were actually talking about the zombie, and that was my bad. Anyways, quote, the zombie was up to no good. They always were. Such creatures would mindlessly continue to follow the orders of the one who made them. Will could chop off their arms, their legs. Hell, he could chop them in half, and both halves would continue to drag themselves toward their ultimate goal. To stop a zombie with a sword, one had to lop off its head. And we find out later on that Will didn't actually bother to grab his sword. So, really repeating everything that we learned in the preface right now, or chapter 1, I guess, isn't needed. It's unnecessary. Don't talk down to your audience. Your audience is never going to like it. And Shakespeare wouldn't talk down to his audience like that. He'd be clever about it. And an asshole. but clever. Quote, not that Will had ever done so, except I'm pretty sure he totally did it just in the last chapter. Yep. Anyways, quote, the creatures he'd made turn to dust on the battlefields of England, Rome, and Scotland for the Henrys, Julius Caesar, and Macbeth. Will had raised them. They'd fought. He'd been paid. When the war was won, those left were dispatched, but not by him. He was sorry for the raising now. So many had died, but when he'd been newly made with a bright, endless future, but no funds, the idea had seemed like a good one. So, like, raising zombies was Will's prostitution, kind of? We'll just move on. It was only later that he saw how very bad an idea it was. I don't know. I feel like, hey, let's raise some rotting corpses from the ground and have them kill things. That kind of, like, some mindless rotting corpses from the ground and tell them to kill things. Like, that's not going to go poorly at all. It's a great idea. God. Ideas were so often like that. I really don't think most ideas are this bad, Will. No, I really... Will had an affinity for the dead because he's a vampire. The talent was not something he gained upon becoming one of them, but something he'd had since he was born. Of course he's had it since he was born. Of course. The first time Will had been labeled, and that is a sentence by itself, whole paragraph by itself. Will had been labeled an insane child, a lunatic youth, because, you don't really need to repeat things like that. It's excessive, it's superfluous, as one of my professors would write next to some of my descriptions. So hurtful, so hurtful. Talking to empty air was not something one did in the years before the birth of Christ, or in the centuries thereafter either. Explaining that he saw dead people, could talk to them, and they talked back, had been a foolish choice on his part. Yep. Probably not always. I'm pretty sure you could get away with it. I'm pretty sure you could. Anyways, Will had managed to avoid being burned for a witch. That had been a very close thing. Forsooth, joining the ranks of the dead when he was 26 had been a relief. He no longer had to hide anything by himself from the light. Honestly, with the language you've been using so far, pulling that in and saying things like that just sounds really, really stilted. It's like you remember suddenly that this is supposed to be Shakespeare's point of view, so you're trying to make it a little more Shakespearean, but you kind of ruined the tone already. You really did. He was able to fit in amongst the living so much better now that he was dead. He need only behave normally, for the most part, during the darkest hours, and humans were not their best then. They were meant to walk in the light. Add this to Will's profession. Being a player was the perfect occupation for one such as he. Actors were known to be strange. Amongst them, Will was no more odd than any other. And if he spoke to empty rooms and deserted corners, those in his company believed the habit a quirk of his genius. He merely spoke to his characters, practiced dialogue, perfected stage movements before he wrote them down. In such beliefs, they were largely correct. Will did speak to his characters. However, sometimes his characters talked back. He'd known Henry, all of them, along with Richard, Macbeth, and his insane wife, too. Now that they were dead, each and every one wanted him to tell their stories. Of course they did. Of course. Like, this argument writes itself, really. I love it. This is great. He didn't mind, but he had his own stories to set on the page as well. No, he didn't. He did not. Okay? Nuh-uh. Okay, Romeo and Juliet, taken from Pyramus and Thisbe, and there's no way he didn't know about it, because in Midsummer Night's Dream, he references Pyramus and Thisbe. He was very original, very, but, the backbones of his plots were taken from other things for the most part, like history, myths, stuff. He sees the zombie, despite the darkness, without any trouble. It was not the same creature that had tried to crack Edmund's head like an egg, but one so new it could have been taken for the living. So we've got two zombies rambling about the streets of wherever they are. I don't want to say London. I do, maybe I don't. I don't know. Somewhere in England. I don't remember reading it. Anyways, as he hurried to catch up, a figure detached from the shadows. Will tense, expecting it to move like a zombie, groan like a zombie, attempt murder like a zombie. I love this. Instead, the new arrival seemed to float, graceful as a swan on the royal pond, slim as one of the reeds that lined the shores. I bet. Hold on. Black cap, black doublet, black breeches, even black boots. Small wonder he hadn't detected the boy. The lad blended into the night better than Will did. I bet that figure isn't a boy. I'm betting. I think we've just met the love interest. Or it could be a boy. But I think this person's still the love interest. And knowing a lot of these authors, it's probably a woman just disguised as a boy. They're not very forward thinking, these authors. Talking about how Will doesn't even have his sword, but Will's bare hands were a deadly weapon, though he was an actor and a writer by trade, and therefore did not appear strong, because actors are never burly, neither writers. Writers are all weak and scrawny and sit in the dark. Will was almost as much of a monster as the one he'd followed here. Wresting free the head would be a simple enough task. Of course it would. Of course. Will didn't need to worry because the zombie's already dead and burst into ash thanks to the mysterious figure. Will was so impressed that the boy had already dispatched the corpse, he strode forward and put his hand on the lad's shoulder. He should have known better. Anyone who'd been confronted by the walking dead would be understandably overwrought. The child was no exception. He spun on nimble feet, slicing Will's neck from ear to ear. Just give me a second. I should have done this earlier, but goodness. Oh my. Okay, so pointed out by Downtrodden Deity, I believe, earlier, was that the last chapter had been written in first person, whereas this chapter is in third person. And then I thought it was because the last chapter has a date in front of it, whereas this chapter did not, so the last chapter could have been more like a journal entry. But I just assumed that the person in the last chapter was Will Shakespeare. But from the description of the events here, the person in the last chapter could have been this boy. But we had no real... This could, I could be, and I'm totally biased here, but I feel like you should have made that a little more clear, that last person wasn't Will Shakespeare, because we're all going into this expecting it to be Shakespeare. And there's not much of it. Fine, I'm just being bitter. But things make a lot more sense now. And I guess Will has not struck off a zombie's head with a sword then. Because otherwise this would just be a really weird coincidence that Will would happen to have done the same thing that this boy did. And that's the end of the chapter. The end. And then the next chapter is in first person from the boy's point of view. So I'm assuming that first person means boy. Third person means Will, which is quite misleading. Quite. Anyways, there's a link at the bottom to the previous part if you missed it. The part before that will be linked in that part. And the next post will probably be a text post. So this book is so much easier and more fun to do a video with. So we'll see. Anyways, until next time.